Thank you. Uh, I am planning some kind of a book commemorating the 50th anniversary of Chiron, the Chiron return of Chiron, called Chiron Return.
Well, that's a good name for it.
It's the name of my nonprofit organization,
Ah,
chironreturn.org, which hosts my radio program and then which did the chronology. I was the kind of COVID daykeeper, and we did a chronology going from 2006 out to the end of 2021
okay.
and recorded 10 events a day when they were happening. So it's basically I will send you one of my coins. I don't think I have one on my desk right now, but let's see. I should show you. You'll like this. I don't know if you can see it. It says
Yeah,
mentor.
I see the centaur on his haunches with a bow and arrow.
Yep. And mentorship and journalism is the top line. And then the back is just the
Okay,
Chiron
yeah.
and a inscription of the First Amendment around the edge.
Mm.
So basically, so Chiron Return's primary role, we're charted as a mentorship organization to train journalists. But there's still an astrology friendly theme. So anyway, the concept of the book is to account for the changes to astrology thanks to Chiron. And right, and what I said in the Mountain Astrologer once, and I had to explain this to the editors, like, well, what do you mean? I said Chiron has led from behind. Chiron has led the field from behind. Chiron has not really been obviously out front, but the influence of Chiron has permeated many different facets of astrology, which would not even exist now. It was a complete sea change, but it kind of rose
Yeah.
up from the bottom.
Well, just along those lines, there's a I have a series of events in my head, and back in either December 73 or January 74, I can't remember. I was invited to go to Manhattan uh, to a publishing party. Eleanor Bach was publishing her book on the Big Four asteroids. And it was I don't know if you've seen it. It was a little blue hardback book that she pretty much self-published, but and that was where at that publishing party is where I discovered Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, but it's also where I met Al Morrison.
Aha.
So everything sprang from that. I look at a series of events. Um, if we hadn't started looking at Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, we might not have paid as much attention to Chiron when it was discovered.
Hmm.
If we hadn't paid attention to Chiron, uh, then who knows whether we would have looked at any of the other centaurs. Um, I also look at when Eris was discovered, and they realized that Pluto was smaller than they thought it was. Uh, would we have bothered studying Pluto if we had known how small it was? So all these things they're all tied in together. And one of my colleagues, her first name is Joyce, and I can't remember her last name, but It'll come to me.
Will
But
you-
she wrote a article called Chiron and Pluto, the Comet Brothers, showing the connection between the two.
Yep.
And one of the things Al introduced me to, he started in the 70s, he started circulating an ephemeris of Halley's Comet, or Halley's Comet, if you want to be precise. And I had never thought of putting a comet in a chart until then.
Mhm.
The idea, we found out that Chiron, there's a comet nucleus, lends a lot more credence to me to see comets in charts,
Mhm.
because I'm already looking at one.
Yep.
So that it's all these different things that they're all interconnected, So yeah, but I think a lot has changed because of Chiron, but I think it actually goes back even a little earlier to when we first started looking at those four asteroids.
Mhm. Yep. Right. I mean, this is really kind of breaking the mold of the Ptolemaic system,
Yeah.
or at least
Well,
expanding it. I mean, it makes a good starting point, I think. I love the Ptolemaic system. Those rulerships and those dignities are highly informative and great fun, you know.
the thing about it is that the more you go into astrology, and if you're really serious, not just trying to add notches to your knowledge belt, but you're serious in expanding your horizons, the more you realize that there are levels and levels and levels. And so, like, you could tell a lot from a chart if you only put the planets out to Saturn. The ancients didn't use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and you can get a lot of out of it. But you get other levels when you add Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. You get other levels when you add other bodies, and I think that my mind is going like all different over the place. You have to excuse me, but one of the things that occurred to me recently, with all these outer planets that we're discovering or outer bodies, and the mythology is non-Greco-Roman, is this is the absolute necessity for a global awareness, because we were raised with a very uh like blinders on with everything Greco-Roman. We need to think globally. And in order to think globally, we have to also look at the mythologies of other cultures and the ways that they think. And I think that's the purpose of adding all these other bodies into our awareness, is to expand our awareness.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, we can thank Mike Brown for that. Mike
oh
Brown
yes,
starts this thing of like, well, he talked about name depletion, from the Greek and Roman myths, and so he gives us Sedna. Of course, they also give us Eris. But the interesting thing is, it's incredible that something had not been called Eris before that time, not even an asteroid. I mean, that's kind of amazing. There were a lot of damn asteroids by the time Eris was discovered, and she was left out of the party, only to be invited in
well,
by Mike Brown.
I think uh, the reason is basically this, right? And it's the same reason that when I tell the story of when Eris crashed the wedding, the one that ended up leading to the Trojan Wars eventually.
Yep.
Anyway, when she crashed the wedding, it was because Chiron,
Did not invite
in
her.
his right, and the logic was
Yeah.
Who in their right mind would invite chaos to a wedding?
Yeah. But
So
those
who in their
sent,
right mind would invite chaos to the astronomy when astronomers are trying to find order in the universe? And right, but Mike has always been a bit of a maverick himself.
yes. Yeah, he's centaurish. My favorite Mike Brown quote was in the New York Times announcement of Eris, where they state the time of the article, and the Times reporter says, "Well, why did you record the time?" And he says, "Because I knew astrologers would ask." It's one of the greatest lines in all of astronomy. I knew
Yeah.
astrologers would ask. And he wrote, one morning I woke up in my inbox was an article, a draft, like an email from Mike. What do you think of this? I Heart Astrologers by Mike Brown. And this is his famous blog about how astrologers and astronomers are twins. We both are doing the same thing, but from different points of view.
Yeah,
Spoken by a
yeah.
Gemini.
I I remember reading that at one point in time, and if I remember correctly, Mike Brown had, I think he had his Chiron in his sixth house, and I was just
Did
thinking
you ever
how,
get his data from him? I can never.
yeah, I did. I'll see if I can find it. If I remember correctly, he had it in his sixth house, and I saw a connection between him and other scientists who went outside of the paradigm. Uh, you
Uh-huh.
know, uh, like I think Copernicus, for example,
Sure.
who went against the trend and said, no, the sun's the center,
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of astronomers to thank. You knew many of them. So you knew Marsden, you knew Charlie. So I consider you the kind of ultimate Chiron bridge between astrology and astronomy. Like you throw those grappling hooks across the canyon and start to make friends with these people. And am I correct here?
All right. Yeah. So I I don't know. I don't remember. Sometimes I tell the same story to multiple people, and I don't remember who I tell it to. So if I've told you this in the past, it's just very relevant to what you're saying right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So when uh, I came home from work one day, and my then wife said, "Hey, did you hear they found the 10th planet?" And I said, "Well, I asked her, and that's all she had heard on the radio. They found the 10th planet." So I went to the library
Uh-huh.
and I found that famous New York Times article, 10th planet discovered. That was the actual headline. And so I read the whole article and I saw two people's names in there. It was Charles Kowal and uh, Brian Marsden.
Yeah.
I wrote to both of them. I asked Kowal if he had some idea when he discovered it. When he personally, not the slide, but when he first recognized it.
Yep.
And I asked Dr. Marsden if there's any way that I could get ephemeris of So they both responded, which to me was like a little piece of heaven, as I wasn't expecting anything from either of them.
Yep.
And but Marsden uh, sent me what was called a search ephemeris. Basically, they only had a few positions, and they extended the likely uh, orbit
At
a
the
little bit.
orbit. Yep.
Yeah, and he sent that to me, and that's what I sent to Al, who then sent it to somebody who had an old TRS-80 computer and converted it into the Zodiac, and that's how we started studying it. And I thanked Brian and Dr. Morrison, and I said, when you get more, I'd love it. So we started a conversation, and at some point, he wanted to know, why I was so interested, and I told him I was an astrologer and stuff. And his attitude was, he didn't see what I saw in it, but that's fine with him. He didn't care.
Yep.
And I've been writing to him for like over a year, and he'd been most gracious, sending more and more until eventually we had 100-year ephemeris, right? But we developed a friendship online because we would talk about other things, non-astronomy in our letters. And so I said, listen, I know that you're not into astrology, but I would love to do your chart sort of to give you an idea how the other half lives, So this is his response. He said, well, I thank you for that, but you know me too well. It's very possible that you could read into what you see. I have a suggestion.
I'm going to send you several sets of data.
Well, no, wait, no.
And you're going to find
listen. He said, I would like to send you the birth data for two people that I know very well. One a man and one a woman. I won't tell you who they are or anything about them. You do their charts for me. So, up for a challenge, right? So, I did that, and I sent the typewritten because I didn't really have a computer back then. It was so I typed the reports out, and about 2 weeks later, I got this letter from Dr. Marsden. He said, "So I want to tell you, I read your two astrology reports with great interest, and first I want to tell you who the people were. The woman was my wife, and she was extremely excited. She said that you had her pegged. The other one, the male, was my associate, Dr. Green. You probably see that name in some of the Marsden stuff. And I will tell you that I must grudgingly state that your reports were about 85% accurate.
B plus.
And I think for an astronomer who prides himself on facts to concede that kind of accuracy, that's kudos for me, but it's also a big part of the bridging of the gap that he was willing to look at the charts,
Mm-hmm. That's fabulous. Yeah. Well, right. But, the impression I get of him was he was an open-minded, intelligent guy. And I'm sure he very much liked having a conversation with somebody who was open-minded and intelligent and took an interest in his field. Who the hell is interested in this stuff, really, except a couple of backyard astronomers who never get to see the things, and then a bunch of freaky astrologers? And I know a lot of serious people, on Chiron and Friends, people like Andrew Holmes, is that his name? And Juan Revilla. They were some serious dudes who were doing this, who knew as much astronomy as like any planetary science as any astronomer knows.
Yeah. Juan's disappeared off the face of the earth.
Yeah,
I have no
we
idea
can't
what
find
happened
him.
to him.
No, he gave up astrology. He went back fully into anthroposophic. They're on their own wavelength. But we just used his program to confirm solar fire to see if we could ever find a Saturn-Neptune conjunction on the Aries point. And we went back to 1 BC in both programs and couldn't find it. But that's for another day. So I'd like to get really what I'm interested in the very most, but there'll be a lot of other things, is the frame of mind um, going into the discovery, which you're now saying was a meeting with, um, okay, hold on, I've got her name here, um, Eleanor Bach,
Yeah.
um, right, who's self-publishing her book, and then you meet Al there, and you
Yes.
start to take an interest. This is the first little click, taking an interest in the asteroids, the four major
Yeah.
asteroids.
Yeah. See, what you may know is that when Ceres was discovered, the astronomers called it a planet. The same thing when Pallas and Juno and Vesta.
Were discovered.
But when they got to Hygeia, they started thinking, wait a minute, this is what too many little bodies for this to be a planet. And then so they demoted them. They called them asteroids after that. But Ceres was a planet when they first discovered it. And there were some astronomers, very few, but some astrologers were actually including Ceres in some of their calculations, and Pallas and Juno. But they were a very small minority, and you have to really look far to find references to, you know. I found one reference from an astrologer who said that he found them significant, but more serious research needs to be done to see what their astrological meaning was. And this was in the 19th century. So there were a few astrologers looking at them, but they were, uh, you know, they were people you never hear of today. They were like, so it was Eleanor Bach's premise that broke the field open, got a lot of people interested in it. And then following that, it was only a few years later that, what is her name? Her son's Mark Pottinger, and I can't remember the
Zip
mother's name.
Dobbins.
Yeah, thank you. Zip Dobbins authorized the publication of a much glossier, bigger, more detailed ephemeris of the big four asteroids. And she had a big network of people because she had her own following, and that really pushed it. And Al came up with the idea of looking at a few of the other asteroids. So at one point, there were like 10 asteroids that he was looking at. You know, there was Eros, E-R-O-S,
Yeah.
and there was Toro and Sappho and Apollo and
Hidalgo.
Bacchus. Anyway,
Did you look at Hidalgo?
what?
Hidalgo.
Yes.
You know that
Yeah.
Hidalgo
As
has
a
been
matter,
reclassified as the first centaur?
yes. Yeah, I have that on my website. Yeah. Matter of fact, when he published these pamphlets, one on each of the asteroids, I wrote the astrology for this. So there's my article, a mini article on Hidalgo is in the Hidalgo ephemeris. Another one was Urania, and there's a British astrologer. I'm drawing blanks right now. Wrote the forward. I mean the information for that one. Let me just see here. Do I have it? Ah,
I'll be right back.
all right, so these are what they look like. These earliest,
Uh-huh. Wow.
and this is the what I was trying to think of.
Urania.
The astrologer that wrote the the astrology for this one was John Addy.
John Addy.
ADDE. Yeah. So these came out in the early days when Chiron was being studied, but not super heavy yet. I mean, I was studying Chiron, and I had my association. I started publishing a newsletter, and I charged people to join my organization just enough to cover the postage to send them the newsletter. And so I would sometimes put my findings on these asteroids in my newsletter as well. But it was called the Association for Studying Chiron, and the name of the newsletter was the key.
Yes. Yes. This now that you remind me, and that I believe that's in your book. We didn't say at the outset that you wrote Chiron, Essence and Application, the first book.
Yeah.
Chiron. But just sticking to that, I'm super curious at this formative moment. So there's interest in the asteroids, thanks to Eleanor, and Al picks up on this, and he's there. I'm sure some of his students were there. And then right upon the discovery, I believe in December 77, it's front page of the New York Times. And I've gone back to that article. I actually dug it out of the Times machine just to have the experience. And what's the first discussion that you remember? Your wife heard it on the radio. She gets your attention. But what's the first discussion that you remember among astrologers, not counting you in the titans of astronomy, the discoverer and the head of the Minor Planet Center, but other astrologers?
All right. So when Dr. Marsden sent me the ephemeris, it was in right ascension and declination.
Right.
And I had no knowledge of spherical trigonometry. I didn't know how to convert it. And we didn't have the internet. So I went to the library and I saw a book that told me how to convert from one to the other. And it was like, okay, I had introduction to calculus. That's as far as my knowledge went. So I was desperate. So I wrote to the person I knew who knew everybody, because Al knew everybody. I mean, if he was like, did you ever read Stranger in a Strange Land?
Sure.
Okay, you remember
it was like Jubal Harshaw, who had
exactly.
Had a Rolodex like that big around, and he had everybody's number in it.
Yeah, except in Al's case, most of it was in here, but yes. Anyway, so I figured if anybody would know how to convert them, Al would. Now, Al was in some ways like a little child on Christmas when I sent the tables to him. He was so excited, and I think her name was Joyce Wehrman, but it's been a long time. He sent the tables to her.
Joyce Mason.
No.
Oh,
Joyce
no.
Mason
Different Joyce.
Not,
sorry.
Yeah. Joyce Mason
she was wrote the Comet Brothers.
Into Chiron, but it was another Joyce that had the TRS-80 computer, which was like a home computer, and those people that didn't like it called it the trash 80. But anyway, she crunched the numbers and then sent them back to Al and sent them to me. And the three of us, me, Al, and Joyce, we started something called a Chiron committee, where we started talking about this. And at this time, it had not been officially named yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we were looking at object Kowal.
Yep, that's the O and the K in the symbol.
Yes. So basically, the first discussion of astrology was between the three of us once we had something to look at, we had positions. We started looking at current transits to our chart and people we knew, because that was the only thing we could do with those positions. And we kept seeing significant events. And when we looked at enough charts, we saw that when Chiron was an aspect to Mars, there was some similarity between the different charts, the events, even if the people had nothing in common. So we started pulling the threads together. And then at that point, I decided I wanted to get as many people as possible. Al asked me to give a talk, and he arranged for he rented a lecture room in one of the United Nations annex buildings, and I gave a talk on Chiron, and which I called The Meaning of Chiron, very original. And Al recorded it, and then he had somebody transcribe it into words. He printed it out, and then he sent me a whole bunch of copies, and he included that in envelopes when anybody contacted Al. When anybody contacted Al to get the void of course moon ephemeris or to buy one of the asteroid ephemeris, he stuck that in there. And
so he invents spam.
and the second batch of publications, I had started my organization. So at the bottom, on the back of that, he put the announcement of the Association for Studying Chiron and the date and time that I gave him for the start and my address. And I got a lot of people from all over the world, pre-internet, writing to me about Chiron, and that's how I started getting members.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how well we did without the internet. I am grateful we can have this conversation in real time, but still let this be an object lesson in how well we did without the internet. And this whole conspiracy was launched by postage stamps and Mimeo machines and Xerox machines.
Oh, do you know Al published everything that he published in his living room? He went to the copy place, had them copy it. He had two machines in his on this big table in his living room, and I was in his apartment many times. Big wooden table, right in the center. One was one of those slicers, with the arm, the paper cutter.
Yeah.
The other was a bookbinding machine.
Yeah.
And Al bound, and everything that he sent out, he bound it in his own living room.
Yeah.
So that's definitely pre-internet. I mean, there was no scanning it and sending it to your personal printer or anything like that.
No, and people still usually have terrible printers. Right, that the cartridge runs out after 3 copies. Okay, so there's a living room publishing operation going on. This is like guerrilla marketing and home publishing. In the words of Marshall McLuhan, anyone with a typewriter and a copy machine can become a publisher.
Yeah.
This is basically what you're doing, utilizing this now ubiquitous technology, but you've got a purpose. And what happens is that, as I've read it, a kind of a think tank emerges, a kind of a group conversation emerges. The author of Erminie Lantero, what was your relationship to Erminie Lantero, and where was she at this time?
Oh, okay. So
She seems like an eminently lovable person.
she was now she she was one of the members of my group, my association. And one day she said that she was going to start putting together an ongoing history about Chiron. She said, we didn't have anything like that for Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. I would like to show all the steps from the discovery, how we uh, how we learn what we learn, so that future generations will know where the our understanding of Chiron came from. And
Yeah.
of course, I was very enthused. So I sent her what I could. I answered her questions. She contacted other people who were significant. Um, there was a astrologer who is more of a journalist than an astrologer, but in Canada, who published his own Chiron ephemeris. Um, and it was more expensive than Al's, but it was glossy. I still have copies somewhere, and he had a forward by Tony Joseph, who, if you've never heard the name, was a Jungian astrologer, uh, psychologist, and Emily talked to him and got his take on it. Um, talked to everybody that she could and started compiling stuff. So that's how that went. I never met her physically in person, but it was all done by letters. I never even talked to her on the phone.
Got it. But your book comes out first because hers
Um,
seems. I mean, she had to compile all these case studies. You're basically publishing observational notes and delineations.
yeah, so to follow up on that train of thought, the newsletter that I was putting out was a combination of my observations and the observations that members sent me in letters. So it was a think tank in a way. So old copies of the newsletter, you'll find basic research studies. You'll find theories. You'll even find poetry. I basically took anything because I didn't want to be a intellectual Nazi, right? And so, but it my understanding of Chiron came from my research, but also from all the stuff that came to me that I coordinated to put in the newsletter.
Sure.
And so this was all going on, and she does mention the key in her book. She mentions the organization, the association. Um, she also, if I remember correctly, mentions Ken, who ran the Princeton, New Jersey Astrology Association. Kenneth, it'll come to me. Kenneth and his wife and were both astrologers. Ken Negus, who wrote an article on the Cathara, and I may be pronouncing it wrong, but this is the musical instrument that Chiron was supposed to play. It was a stringed instrument, and he wrote a whole article about the meaning of this Cathara.
Cathara.
Yeah, if I knew Greek, I would know how to pronounce it.
Got it. Now, also, the CAO Times is coming out with information too, right? This is Morrison's newsletter, right?
Yeah, and so we take a step back. Al, at one point, tried to do something that was really not his forte. he tried to bring together a lot of small astrology organizations, and uh, it was originally called the Congress of Astrological Organizations,
Yep.
and the early publication was for the CAO, Congress of Astrological.
Ah,
Now, CAO Times, he kept it up because he had paid subscribers even after the group folded. So
right.
if you didn't know about the Congress, you wouldn't know where the CAO came from.
Yep. Yep.
But there's a very uh, a significant issue of shortly before Chiron was discovered, the cover of the CAO Times had a picture of a crane lifting a globe up above a skyline, and the caption read, "Pedestrians watch as a new planet is lifted into the heavens." And that was shortly before Chiron was
Oh, come
discovered.
on. This almost like the Fire of London print in from Lilly, but better, but better.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, the question is,
It's a tarot card.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
what was it? Total coincidence, or was he press? Whatever the word is,
Yeah, Brad,
psychic.
it's perfect synchronicity. It's perfect synchronicity.
You know about the earlier people that kind of predicted Chiron? What's what? Oh god, oh god, I hate when my brain goes. He was a colleague of Jones and a colleague of Rudyard, but I can't remember his name. Uh, but
Right.
he,
But not Bailey. Bailey said there would be 50 planets. It's right in esoteric astrology that there's going to be 50 planets soon.
yeah,
Another, we're psychic with a crystal ball.
I have had an interesting relationship with
Bailey?
the works of Bailey. When I
Ah,
was fairly new in astrology, I was a college student at Pennsylvania State University on the main campus, and this is back in the days when peace, love, and granola was the catchphrase, you know. So somebody had what was called a free store.
mm-hmm.
Basically, you took stuff you didn't want in there and dropped it off, and you found something you want and you took it home. That was it. So it's sort of like a trading thing. And there were some books in there, and there was on the shelf there was Alice Bailey's astrology book. Somebody put it in there. So I took it home and tried to read it, and I was like, huh? I just
Yeah.
could not get into it. Years later, when I moved to Australia, uh, Lynette, who is my ex-wife, but also my astrology partner, still, she was into esoteric astrology, and she got me to look at it again. And uh, then I connected with an old colleague of mine named Alan Oken. You know Alan?
Sure.
Did you know him?
Loved Alan Oken.
And right. And I found his book, Soul Centered Astrology, and
Mhm.
I started really getting into it. And I was able to understand things I couldn't understand as a newbie.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
so,
it's complicated. I knew to read it, not attempting to understand it. I knew to just read it and read it. And don't worry if I don't fucking get it. And I can't line up all the seven rays with all the and it did its work. It did its work. Yeah. And I refer to it I've got copies scattered around. I'm and Melanie Reinhardt and I are she's my go-to person on Bailey. She has Bailey's complete works on her computer. And you know who
I
else?
tell you,
Isabel
Manuel.
Hickey. We talked to Isabel Hickey's daughter, who said yes, she was a voracious reader of Bailey. For whatever Bailey is worth, you can always tell the people who have some affinity for her and the ones who don't. You know, there's a spiritual quality that she brings in that goes beyond the mechanistic and the the Greek, this whole Greek perfection concept. And she, she's kind of a bit of Eris character. We should check Eris in her chart actually. Uh,
You know, I the year before Alan Oken died, uh, he and I have been in contact for quite a while, and he asked me to do his chart. He wanted me to do his chart. I don't know if you realize how daunting that was for me to read Alan's chart, right?
yeah. Well, he
So
really one of the better astrologers who came through the 20th century in terms of a coherent philosophy, consistently loving, uh, you know,
yeah, so um, he was going to pay me. He was going to pay me. He said, "What? How much do you charge?" I said, "Tell you what. How about we do a trade? I will do your chart if you will do my chart." So I had two recordings on my computer. One, the my interpretation of his chart, and one his of mine. And those I will treasure. And then about a year later, he passed away.
yep. Okay, so what about so let's stay back at the beginning here. I know there's a lot of we're talking about 50 years here to cover, but the point where essence and application is kind of born, and I imagine this is out of a long discussion with Al, who wrote a million letters. Like he seemed to write a lot of letters. And where does the concept for essence and application come from? And how many years' work did you have in before you felt like you could say something, definitive about a Chiron aspect?
Okay, so this was I started writing this book, if I remember correctly, when there was a Jupiter Neptune conjunction. Let me see if I can.
Do you have a chart for that?
Probably somewhere. Just a minute. I'm going to see if I can get a guesstimate.
Oh, the Jupiter Saturn was 81.
No, Jupiter. No, not Jupiter Saturn. Jupiter Neptune.
Ah, hold on. I have a program that searches that, which is the reason why I run all these OS 10 machines. Windows
Okay, so this was in 1984.
84.
All right, it was Jupiter Neptune. It was conjunct at about 1 degree of Capricorn on my Chiron.
Yeah.
So that's when I chose to write the book. I saw Jupiter conjunct Neptune on my Chiron, and I have Pisces ascendant, and I have Jupiter in the first house, opposition Neptune in the seventh. I figured this has got to be my aspect. So that's the date I chose to write it, and I just started pulling everything together that I had from all. Uh, I'm a very eclectic note taker, so in one part of my book, I talk about how we totally ignore stuff that nature gives us that's very good to us. I even talk about how uh, the nutritional value of a dandelion, something that we try to get rid of, you
Yeah.
know. So I got pulled together everything that I could find because I felt that the time was now to write something. It was a compulsion, or a I felt that I had to do this.
Yep. Yeah, that Jupiter Neptune was bang on your Chiron to one
Yeah,
arc fucking minute. That's the heavens
Yeah.
summoning you. And what you're doing,
Yeah.
I think of Chiron as like the light filament inside that Jupiter Neptune, illuminating the entire thing from inside.
Yeah.
Fabulous. And then Erminie, I don't know what date her book comes out, but her book is different because it's a case study book.
Yeah.
All right. And so what I love is that Al puts up the money to publish this.
Yeah.
So this is in the days when Linda Goodman is still in business,
Oh, yeah.
and another student of Al's who was Debbie Kempton Smith. She's got a
Oh,
bestseller in Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook, one of the best books ever written.
you may know this, but Debbie and I were lifelong friends.
I did well. I met her a couple of times. Certainly once I remember, and she was telling me Al Morrison stories. So I'm not surprised. She had a one-on-one in-person relationship with Al, right?
Yeah, and when Debbie's Secrets from a Stargazer's Notebook was published, and Debbie had a publishing party for uh, it took place in Al's apartment in New York.
Ah, okay.
And I have this photograph somewhere of Debbie standing and Al sitting in a chair looking like always pictured Jubal. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, in her book, the section on Chiron, she interviewed me for you. So if you have her book, you know that. I will tell you the story there. She told me when she was writing the book, what she was planning on doing. And she said, I'd like to interview you. And I said, it's fine. She said, I'm coming to Philadelphia. And so she had a friend who had a bookstore, and the back room was a meeting room in Philadelphia. So we went into the back room, and she brought out a tape recorder and started asking me questions, which ended up being that chapter.
Yep. I'll tell you what a small world it is. When she died, her then partner wrote to me and said that me and my wife were at your parents' wedding.
That's really,
Carole King and Jerry Goffin were also there. So that was a heck of a wedding. I was not there. I was a concept. I think I was conceived like the next day. But so yeah, I knew Debbie. Debbie told me not to be an astrologer. I didn't listen to her. That's a good thing
well,
too.
I
She
love
said, "Go
I
back to
love
grad
Debbie.
school. Go to grad school.
I love
Don't be an astrologer."
I love Debbie dearly, but she was not always on the mark because she's a human being. Um, you, if you're ever interested, if you haven't seen it, I have a whole page on my website that is a memorial to Debbie with
I will
photographs.
check it out. Look, what I love about Debbie is that she wrote a book that was so fucking funny that you would memorize it as you would go, and you could crack it open at a party and have everybody in stitches. And it was blisteringly hilarious. And she is the perfect model of how to make astrology funny. It was brutal. The Sagittarius moon, the Bobo doll, you punch the thing and it just stands right back up. Venus and Aquarius. You know those $50 robots you can get at Sears?
Yeah.
Moon and Aquarius. You're deep as the kitchen sink. Capricorn moon. I haven't read this thing in 15, 20 years. The mommy dearest moon. So when so you get it right away without it being some stuffy scholarly thing. She brings it right into real life.
Debbie, she understood the personifications of the signs. So to her, she wasn't just expressing knowledge. She felt the sign's
Yeah,
essence.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm just trying to remember. She and I were at a conference. I don't remember which astrology conference it was, but all of the people at the dinner party, they decided they were going to have 12 people, each one for the floor show, demonstrating how they saw one of the signs. All right. And so I don't know if you've ever seen Debbie's chart.
Yeah, I did. She gave it to
Um,
me and she kind of trapped me. She handed me her chart in a Chinese restaurant. And when I read the South Node in the eighth house, she jumped down my throat and said, "All you men, all you see is the eighth house South Node." So it was a little bit of a little. I forgave her for the trap, but that's when I that was my experience. She had me. I was maybe an astrologer for 1 year, right? I was new,
well,
and she
yeah.
hands me your chart to read. I'm like, okay.
Well, at this dinner, Debbie decided her sun moon sign Aries.
She's born with an Aries new moon.
Yeah, well, yeah, the moon was 13 and the sun's 25. So she was born the day before it was exact. Yeah.
Yeah.
So she comes out uh wrapped in like a cloak, and she comes out from the behind the curtain, right? And then she throws off the curtain,
Ah.
and she is wearing the sexiest damn belly dancer costume I've ever seen. And then she starts throwing herself around in a very Aryan fashion. And so she really got into that. Hey, look at me. It's spring. I'm bursting through the soil. Look at me. Anyway, so that very fond memory.
Yeah, yeah, she was one of a kind. I mean, and Morrison also. I mean, these are very centaurish people. And what But I think it's impressive that essentially Chiron starts as a kind of an underground publishing operation. That it's a committee, it's groups of people, but while you've got Debbie knocking out like really one of the last bestsellers, you've got Linda Goodman, who is a phenomenal astrologer, putting out these bestsellers. There's this other thing going on, in clandestine meetings with home choppers and bookbinders going out, and Marsden spiking every package with a copy of your lecture, and it starts as an underground phenomenon, which is perfectly Chiron.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guy did spend a lot of his time in his cave.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and teaching. Though this is the thing that I think that the thing that most of the commentary about Chiron over the years has not emphasized enough, though you have it in your book, is mentorship, is the one-on-one, the power of one-on-one teaching. I think this is a theme that stands above all the other Chiron, wounding healing and holistic and all this stuff. I think that the theme of one-on-one teaching is the preeminent Chiron theme.
I will tell you, following your train of thought there, but let me add another layer to it. So when Chiron was pretty much abandoned by his mother, who took one look when he was born and said, "Get this monster out of my sight. I never want to see it again," right?
And she turns
so
herself into a
his heart,
tree, right? She turns herself into a tree, right?
yeah. Well, actually, she doesn't turn herself in. She asks, and she's given the forgetfulness of being turned into the tree by one of the other gods. But anyway, so here you have this guy, and he's born, and unlike human babies, it seems in mythology you're fully sentient even when you're born. So the first thing he hears is that he's a horrible monster. He also
Ah,
doesn't know his father because his father abandoned him at conception. So he's got nobody. He slinks into his cave. And if it wasn't for two other gods, he might never have come out.
Apollo and
Yes, Diana or Artemis, but yes.
ah,
So Apollo, they took him in and they mentored him. Apollo taught him everything he knew about music, about healing. Originally Apollo was the god of healing, as among other things. So he was mentored, and you can only teach what you've learned. You can't teach what you don't know. So he became a mentor to all the great heroes because he himself was mentored by the heroic types, by the god and goddess.
yep. Yeah, so there's a teaching approach that's so crucial. I didn't know about the Artemis the Artemis connection. And then so he obviously outgrows this, but the beginning of his story is a story of rejection by
Yes,
his parents.
it's rejection by his mother, and pretty much abandonment by his father because his father had nothing to do with him.
Well, yeah, there was an illicit. It's Kronos. It was an illicit affair,
Yes.
and he's hiding. He turned himself into a horse to hide himself from his wife, right? Who was
All right. Now there's two versions of the story. Yeah, he turns into a horse, but there's two versions of the story. One, he turns himself into a horse to hide him. The other one is that the nymph he's chasing is terrified, and she changed herself into a horse to get away. He changes himself into a horse to catch up with her, and then he rapes her. So that's the other story.
Phileria?
But yeah, so either way, um, when Kronos or Saturn hears his wife coming, he's already in the horse form, one way or another. He gallops away so he's not caught, and he doesn't even know that he's sired a child. He's just gone.
Ah, ah. Yeah, we have a whole weird concept of Saturn that does not include a lot of factors that need to be included in Saturn,
Yeah,
like
I know.
Saturnalia. Since when does Saturnalia ever enter the discussion of Saturn? Right,
Well,
with schoolmasters and all this.
I always had this. Sometimes when I don't understand something, I make up a story in my head so that so it'll make sense to me. And I always thought, okay, so here you've been working and working and trying to get all the harvest in before winter comes. You want to make sure that the a barn it won't leak so that your the grain won't be ruined. You've got all the work done. There's not a damn thing left that you have to do. Now you can party. That to me is the Saturnalia.
Yeah.
It's what happens after you do everything that Saturn expects of you. Then you can be totally free. And I always think about the people that I know who have Saturn rising. When they were kids, they were like a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. They were like in some ways they were old men and women before their time. But when they get older and they've handled everything, they have some of the funniest sense of humors. That they see humor in everything that they didn't see as a kid because they've done their Saturn time. Now they can have their fun.
Yep. Yeah. Well, there's no sense of humor like a Capricorn or Saturn driven sense of humor. These people are powder dry. Lucille Ball, for example,
Oh
Capricorn
yeah.
Moon rising, one of the funniest women ever in human history. Okay, so let's can we go to 1992 now? That was a major year in planetary discovery because there were two major discoveries, probably more in 92, but Pholus and QB1 are both discovered. The first
Yes. Yes.
trans-Plutonian planet and then the second centaur. So the Kuiper belt is confirmed and the centaurs are confirmed in 92.
And I remember reading when I heard about Pholus being discovered. I did what I always do. I started looking through publications, and I found mention of it in Sky and Telescope and all these different publications. And one of them, I never forget, the headline read, "Son of Chiron, now appearing in space."
In Sky and Telescope.
And yeah, and so there, initially it was seen as being a lot like Chiron. It wasn't until later that they realized how different they were.
Well, it's not a comet. It's a rocky red thing. But
Yeah,
the orbit, the property of the orbit, I think, is the important thing.
right. And so, like Chiron, it's an orbit crosser, but its orbit is even more elliptical, so it goes out past Uranus.
Out
You
to
know,
Neptune, almost out to Neptune.
yes.
Yep.
And the one that came after it, Nessus, it goes out almost to Pluto.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's got an absolutely ridiculous orbit. But this is why they're centaurs and not asteroids. They're in these orbits. Now, what was your first take in delineation on Pholus? You recall? I know Von Heeren and Dieter Koch did fabulous work, but I'm wondering what you thought.
Uh, I I started uh, initially seeing it prominent in things that had to do with certain kinds of infections, like diseases and stuff. And I knew that it couldn't simply be that was all it was, but it was significant. And then I got a woman who had self-published a booklet, um, 8.5 by 11 pages, and she used a one of those binding clips, right? And it was on Pholus, and she made a connection between the symbol that I came up with for Pholus and a virus. See, let me tell you, the symbol that I came up with, I was thinking of a centaur. I don't know what the position it is when a horse gets down. So he's still upright, but he's like partially down. So he's like his front knees are bent. So he's like,
Like kneeling down.
but yeah, but if you can imagine looking head on at a horse or a centaur in that position, that was the image that I had in my mind when I came up with the Pholus symbol.
Hmm.
All right. Well, she sent me a picture of these micro photographs. I think they were T1 viruses. It's been a while, but they looked almost identical to my symbol, except my symbol has a circle, and the circle in the T1 virus is a six-sided thing rather than a round thing, but it's basically looked the same thing. And the bottom part, which in my mind was the bent legs, are the part of the virus that sticks itself into a cell injects the DNA or whatever into the cell so it can start replicating itself. So she had found a lot of connections to viruses and stuff. And so that was my early thing. I started seeing things like that, and so did she, and we connected. And the next thing that I saw when I got a little beyond that was the idea of somehow kind of the universe pushing you to take a step into the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it's like, with Uranus, sometimes it comes like a lightning bolt and the unknown hits you like a bolt out of the blue. But what do you do if you're staring in the face of the unknown, and it's the only place to go? It can be terrifying, but it can also be freeing if you take the step.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another thing that I saw with Folis is that it's like when you take the step into the unknown, it requires some courage, but quite often it opens up a whole world of new possibilities. Like the lids come off.
Yeah, that's out of the cask of wine. There's a
Yeah.
distinct image of the wine, the wine lid coming off because Heracles shows up and he wants to drink your dad's 75-year-old Chivas Regal, and you're like, well, no, we have some wild turkey, and and it's Bono at the door, and he's like, listen, bro, I'm not drinking any fucking wild turkey. There's a bottle of Chivas Regal in that cabinet. I'm looking right at it. I want you to open that bottle up.
Yeah. And then so what you have is this scent from this cask of wine is so strong that suddenly all these frat boys come down from the hills because they smell it and they start seeing, seeing through the drunken haze and stuff.
Yep.
That's how I look at this: the invasion of the centaurs, like the wild drunken frat boys.
Yeah, Dave Arner described them like Hell's Angels. He said they're the Hell's Angels of astrology. And when you read the myths, they make the Hell's Angels look like the fucking Boy Scouts, raping the bride at weddings on a regular basis.
Oh, I know. I can't. One of the centaurs was caught trying to rape one of the women, and he was such. The centaurs were big. Like when you think of a horse, you don't think of. You're not thinking of a centaur. Think of a Clydesdale with a human head.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
are the centaurs.
Yeah, exactly. Not a little pony, a miniature pony, but no, he's standing like 20 feet tall.
Yeah, so there's one centaur that was pretty much unstoppable. And so finally somebody has tried everything and nothing brings it down. He jumps on the centaur's back and rams a wooden shaft right through the guy's face.
Which one was this that was unstoppable?
I'd have to look at I've got little bits.
When you think of it, let me know. So now,
yeah,
your delineation of Pholus sounds a little like my delineation of QB1. Beyond the realm of Pluto, the terrifying territory beyond the realm of Pluto. Yeah. It's more an invitation or an option than Pluto, which runs reality at the point of a gun. Pluto is the offer you can't refuse, whereas QB1 is more like the invitation that you're intrigued by.
Okay. Trying to think of how there is a major difference between them. I see QB1 as more of a the invitation is for something much bigger. The step that you're taking is into a much larger world,
Uh-huh.
whereas
Yeah.
with Follis, it's maybe just beyond your present frame of reference.
Yeah. Though with Follis, as Von Heeren said, small cause and big effect.
Yeah,
Right. So you think it's one thing, but it's really another thing. All right.
yeah.
So we've been grousing around the same territory on these two things, but the 92 ends up being this serious watershed year. And there are other Chiron publications around that time, but I think most notably is Operation Hindsight. Project
Ah,
Hindsight branches out of a UAC meeting, right? And was that in 93? I think that was in 93.
probably. I mean, I only have had the good fortune of meeting. I only know Bob Hand. I don't know. I've never met the other two Bobs.
Yeah.
The other two Roberts.
Yep.
But
Zoller and Schmidt. Yep.
yeah. So the only one, Bob Hand is very approachable. I don't know if you've ever had the good fortune, but
Sure. I've had
he's
many
he
great conversations with him that are more
yeah.
important than any book I've ever read. Things that he said to me just in conversations. This is the one-on-one factor because we could communicate in our own language and I could ask my specific questions and get specific answers. And I was on the phone with him when his PhD arrived by FedEx from Catholic University of America. I nearly fainted. The doorbell rang during the phone call. And it was the FedEx truck delivering this tube with his doctoral certificate in the thing. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So yeah, so I have good karma with Rob Hand, and we've had a great many fun conversations, including about bizarre things like the trans-Neptunian points. Let's just finish up on 92 for a second, because what happens
Yeah.
after
So yeah.
92 is the lid comes off, and suddenly there's going to be 75 centaurs and 75 trans-Neptunian objects after 92. Oh, we know they exist, and then suddenly there's this population of both of those things.
All right. Let me a couple things. All right. Um, you mentioned the Project Hindsight happening around then. I think what's significant about Project Hindsight is that to me, it's like the Saturn Uranus midpoint. It's bringing the past into the future.
Yep. Yeah.
And to me, it's very chironic, because they didn't say, all right, all these things here, forget everything that you've learned, it's all wrong. They said, you have forgotten these things. You need to add all these things that have forgotten to your astrology. You need to bring that in. So it's like bridging the gap between the past and the future with Project Hindsight.
Yep. And
Um,
I was at a Congress. I was at 96 with Dave Wilcock and I. Dave Wilcock and I went to the 96 Hindsight, and it was not. It was a little bit stuffy, but it was not. It was much more fun than the current dogma of ancient astrology. I thought.
I think this is a good place also to bring another thing in here, and you probably know this too, but um, myself and Robert Van Heeren and another astrologer, we were all independently studying um, the centaurs, and we were communicating with each other, and we both, I with my group, I had a group at this point of people interested in Chiron and the other centaurs. I called it Chiron and Friends. It was like a mailing list. And so all of my friends and I on this list, we got together, and with our research, we thought that the body that is now called Nessus seemed like Nessus.
Yep.
It seemed like that's what it should be called. Independently, von Heeren and his colleague did the same thing. So myself and von Heeren both sent emails to Dr. Marsden with a suggestion to name that body Nessus.
Yes.
And I don't know what he said to Robert, but to me, he said he would see what he could do, and it was.
Yep.
And then the next two after that, I think it was
Aspolis and Cariclo.
And yeah, were also named by astrologers. And I think that is also a turning point, because the last time astrologers named bodies was when the astrologers and astronomers were the same guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, this I think is one of the miracles of the Centaur era. And I have continued the tradition of having real conversations with astrophysicists, and I always think of you. One day last year around this time, I was so pissed off at the flat earthers, and they're saying everything's fake and nothing's real and not. So I'm looking around for photos of Pluto from New Horizons, and I wind up getting a hold of Alan Stern's kind of representative at the Southwest Institute, whatever it's called, and they give me half an hour with Alan Stern, and so I was going to decide whether I thought from my conversation with Stern that he really sent a thing to Pluto, and I decided to start the conversation with the question. I looked up the first paper on QB1 by Jane Liu and Dave Jewett, and I thought, okay, let's see if he knows this paper, then he's probably the real thing. Well, he says, yeah, I know that paper. I'll send you this tape. It's precious. I'll do you one better. I was the peer reviewer of that paper. Because I read that, they sent me that paper. Nobody knew shit about this, but they figured I did, and he let that get in. He made sure that got published, and we had quite a rollicking 27-minute conversation that was what you'd expect between me and a former NASA administrator. But I ended up having the greatest respect for him and his pure chutzpah. On his fucking birthday, I interviewed him, and his chutzpah to basically cobble this thing together from scraps and bash it through the budget for $1 billion. And not only that, get the thing to Pluto and get the first good photos, which they didn't have when they demoted Pluto. And then they have to discover Arrokoth. They've got a trajectory. They know they can only go like so far off their trajectory, and they need to find something on the path and they fucking discover Arrokoth to get it there. It's epic. The whole thing is epic. And so I think of you when I'm talking to these guys, because I'm like, you kind of built the groundwork for the modern connection of astronomy, and it's perfect Chiron. This is what Chiron was born to do.
Well, I don't know if you ever play around with the Sabian symbols, but since my Chiron is the first degree of Capricorn, it is basically a Native American chief addressing the multitudes. So here I am, Mr. Chiron, right? But
leading from behind, though, that's the thing. A lot of people don't know who you are. There are, shall we say, more famous people who've written books about Chiron who do not realize that Chiron almost always leads from the rear.
Yeah. I think some of my favorite people have always been people who have Chiron in the 12th house. These are the people who they make these fantastic discoveries, but they don't really care whether they ever get any credit for them or not. They just want the information out there.
Yep. Interesting.
That was Al, by the way, Chiron in the 12th.
Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, conjunct
Um,
Eris. So he really is.
yeah.
He's really the first case study in the Chiron Eris conjunction, which then happens in 71, 72, and leads to this second 60s. Basically, there was the Uranus Pluto 60s. Then there was the Chiron Eris 60s. And then now we're about to have the in living memory the third Chiron Eris conjunction. That's going to be next year in 2026.
I need to get off the track a little bit because I just had a memory pass and I wanted to share this with you.
Please.
So, um, I got a package from Debbie Kenton Smith in the mail one day. It was a thin, flat package, and in it was a little booklet, and an invitation. And when I opened the invitation, it was an invitation to go to the Museum of Natural History in New York. I think that's where it was, and sit in the audience for a panel discussion on should Pluto be demoted. Marsden was there. Alan Stern was there. Steve, something Levi. So Levi, he was a famous amateur astrologer who discovered a number of bodies from his backyard. Anyway,
Jane
so
Lou, nowhere near it. Jane Lou wouldn't go near something like that if you forced her.
But so anyway, so we were. So I was thrilled, and I went to this thing, and I sat there, and afterwards, Marsden basically he was like on the fence. He saw both sides, so he didn't commit to it being,
Not a planet.
and Levi thought definitely it should be demoted. But so afterwards, I went. Debbie said, "Here's your chance. Go introduce yourself," because I'd never met him in person. So I have
Who
one of
Marsden?
my Al Mars, Al, I mean Brian Marsden.
Yes.
So I have this picture of Brian and I standing together in suits with smiles on our face. That's one of my fondest treasures. That's the first time I ever met him in person. It was at the should Pluto be demoted talk.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to have a scan of that. If you find it in your heart to send a scan of that, that is and I think that while we're here having this conversation, I think that the bridges between astronomy and astrology really need to be cultivated more, and that we need to get more astrologers understanding the astronomy, because this is one of the things that Chiron ushers in, is that the astrologers had to get an understanding of astronomy. You're looking at a right ascension, a right ascension ephemeris, and you've got to fucking solve the problem. And then we've all, when you look at all the people contributing to Chiron and Friends and all the original Centaur Research Group and Von Heeren and all, they all know the astronomy very well.
When I've been studying for Chiron for a while, and so on my website, I had a section devoted to the astronomy. A lot of my articles were both astrology and astronomy. I wrote to a group. This was back in the 90s, but it was early 90s. It was called the Chiron Perihelion Committee.
Yeah.
And it was a group of astronomers collating information on the upcoming Chiron perihelion in 96.
Yep. We're at the aphelion now. Where's that? Did we pass the aphelion, or we're right there now? Let's see. I figured this out once. May 2021. Oops.
Yeah, it was because the previous one was 1970.
Yes, right around the first Eris conjunction.
So, to make the long story short, they invited me to join with them and to contribute my insights into the astronomy. So if there's ever find an old Chiron perihelion committee website that hasn't been taken down, and you see the people's names that are contributors, my name will be on there.
Right.
And so but not as an astrologer, just as a contributor.
Yeah, I mean that. Oh! This is the Astronomers Chiron Perihelion Committee.
Yes.
Right now, I mean, they need to send something out there to go look at it, but this is the wrong time in the cycle to do that. They've got to catch it when it's in Libra to do that. Okay, so I remain highly interested in perpetuating this understanding of astronomy by astrologers, and then getting the astronomers and the astrologers talking. Well, I'll tell you what I've noticed. It's only the two-bit astronomers who put down astrology, and all the great astronomers, they seem to be the ones who will actually have a conversation or even talk to me. And by those, I include Mike Brown, Chad Trujillo, Jane Liu, Dave Jewett, Alan Stern. I don't think he knew I was an astrologer, but he could have known. And then one other, Brent Tully, the great attractor guy, knew full well he was coming on an astrology podcast, and talked to me for like 75 minutes. And finally I asked him if he thought he discovered God, and he didn't really like the question very much. But after listening to him for an hour and 15 minutes, like, well, this leads to one obvious question here. So I have learned a lot from these guys, and I think it's one of the last honest sciences. I think that there's no way that they can exploit what they're doing for megabucks like geologists and biologists and virologists. There's so much money going to the pharmacologists and vaccinologists, but these people are looking at they're looking at ice cubes, orbiting 25 astronomical units away from the Earth.
These people are interested in discovery for the sake of discovery.
Yes, yeah, and that's really what I love about them. Plus, physicists almost all have a sense of humor. That's they are all wicked funny, and they're packing jokes into their little nomenclature that looks all so serious, but they're lacing it with humor.
What did you think of Carl Sagan?
I had great respect for Carl Sagan. And
did you ever hear him when he was when somebody said something about astrology to him? Did you ever hear his response?
Well, he gives the demon haunted world speech, right? But ultimately, he wouldn't sign Kurtz's petition.
What?
Because it wasn't scientific. Whenever you see scientists signing a petition, they're full of shit. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, one of the things that he said that I remember very vividly reading it is that something along these lines. Well, I do not see astrology as being a science. There has been no study ever done to disprove it.
Yeah.
And so we cannot say astrology is not valid.
And that's a scientist. That's what a scientist is supposed to fucking say. I don't have any data on that matter. They should always be looking for their data. And if you don't have any data, you're screwed. That's the right answer. So yes, I remember that. And did you can't, no way you could have known this, but this is one of the craziest facts of my entire life. I went to SUNY Buffalo, and on my first day of my first class at SUNY Buffalo, I was 5 minutes late, so I know the time. I strolled into the lecture hall of Paul Kurtz, teaching an introduction to philosophy, and he was the nemesis of astrology. He gets those Nobel laureates and everyone to sign the aforementioned petition that Sagan wouldn't sign. And so I actually knew him and took additional classes with him, and I absolutely love the guy. He didn't seem like a mean person, but he had some issue with astrology, I think, from an ex-girlfriend or something like this. Do you know that
Well,
story of why he hated astrology so much?
no, but I I like the people who um don't like astrology, but have Patrick Henry's idea. I may disagree with what you believe, but I'll defend to the death your right to believe it. You know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I mean, what is the threat really? What's the threat actually? And they, without us, they wouldn't be them, because we're the ones who preserved the ephemeris when science was under attack, and we're
yeah,
the ones who are really paying attention to the orbital cycles, and we discovering declination, and we're all obsessed with the mathematics of it all, and we're tracking the fixed stars. Who the hell cares? We care. So we're
yeah,
still keeping their tradition alive. When the astronomers do something exciting, the astrologers are particularly the freaks we hang out with, but the astrologers are the ones who get excited by the things that astronomers are doing.
yeah. Oh, I just happened to notice that I had two books here that I mentioned earlier. This was the other ephemeris of Chiron that
Yeah, peg it back a little bit. Who's the this is this
it's
is this
it says here
ACS?
phenomenon phenomena publications, and um it says in the front by James Neely and Eric Tarkington, but it was published by Malcolm Dean, who was the Canadian astrologer journalist that I mentioned.
James Neely.
Yeah, James Neely is somebody that one of the people that I talked to several times, asking him for how to calculate stuff when I was starting to try and figure out how to find positions of bodies based on their orbital elements. James Neely helped me out with that.
Hmm.
He he very technical, but he was very friendly to astrologers. But he was not an astrologer himself.
Do you know what he covered?
What do you
What is
mean?
like what he wrote about as a journalist, or was he general interest? James Neely,
Um,
Canadian.
well,
Let's see. See if we get
I
anything
don't
here.
know. He was the one that helped organize
Irish
the
journalist Bill
calculation.
Neely. No, that's Bill. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Uh, Neely helped organize the calculations with Eric Tarkington for the positions, and then later on, they added some to it with the help of Mark Pottinger. And Tony Joseph wrote the introduction, and Malcolm Dean edited it. That's how it's listed here.
Malcolm Dean.
But
He's an infamous character.
the text in the introduction is all Tony Joseph. The introduction,
Right.
and
Wasn't
the
Malcolm
other
Dean the
one,
guy who would make cases against astrology, and like he became famous by arguing against astrology?
yeah, he did, but then he kind of changed his tune. He also proposed a symbol for Chiron that looked like an old cattle brand. It looked like a C and two lines through it to make an H,
Yep.
and it looked like yeah, that was
Almost
his
like a
symbol.
cryptocurrency symbol. You know, while you're mentioning
Yeah.
the Maverick thing, one of the interesting things about Chiron is that the first keyword for Chiron came from the discoverer when he said this thing is a maverick, and
Yes.
then it becomes the and then I believe you tell the story of what a maverick is, which is the guy who will not brand his cattle because
Yes.
it's needlessly cruel.
Samuel Maverick. Yeah.
Yep. So so Maverick and mentorship, I think, really are they're the very heart of the matter with Chiron, and then it all kind of grows out of that.
Yeah. I've done a lot of research also on Cariclo, and I just want to bring her in for a second here, even
Please
though
do.
that's so. The story goes that the Cariclo was a wood nymph, like she lived in the forest, and some say that she was a handmaiden for Diana, and others say that was a different wood nymph. But anyway, so one day she's walking in the woods, and in the clearing, she sees Chiron. And if you can imagine little Cupid with his arrows, she felt instantly in love at first sight with the centaur. But she knew that she couldn't possibly even approach him because, I mean, he's not even going to notice her. So, in order to approach him, he changes her form into that of a female centaur and approaches him, and he falls instantly in love with her in her new form.
His mother was a nymph. Wasn't Phileria a nymph also?
Yeah, yeah. And so Caraclo, her lineage is both nymphs and gods or demigods. She had both in her lineage, so she also. Um, but I always have this image in my mind. So here's this guy, Chiron, and from the moment he was born, the first thing he thinks is he's a monster, and he carries this "I'm a monster" inside this pain. And then here's this woman who not only doesn't see him as a monster, but thinks he's so beautiful that she falls in love with him. She changes herself into the very form he always thought it's monstrous just to be with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if anything must have helped heal his emotional, psychological scars, it was her doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, certainly
Yeah, and
the
this is it. This,
rejection by his
yeah.
mother, the complete abandonment by his mother, who commits suicide basically.
Well, if you read enough Greek authors, eventually she is changed back, and in some stories she joins him, uh, helping in his school with Caraclo. Uh, so some
Ah,
stories she doesn't. That she anyway.
I
She
never heard this. There's always the multiple versions. It's very important to contrast them because they create delineations also, the either this or that version of things is
yeah.
very productive.
There's a Greek website, THEOI or something like that, that always has several different quotes from various authors on it. I've used it many times, and including contradictory stories.
Interesting.
Wish I It's like THEOI or something like that.
Hmm.
You might have stumbled across that. And this is the other book that I mentioned. This is the one that was the
Can you
Eleanor
angle it
Bach.
just
This is the
slightly a little bit?
which
Ah,
way?
so pull it back a little bit. Catch the light. There you go. When it catches the light, Siri. Ah, okay. So this is the book there was the publishing party for. It was an ephemeris.
Yes. And in the front, um, she's got a forward. She first talks about planets, Jupiter and stuff, and how they got their origin. Then she talks about the asteroids as the astronomy of the asteroids with cometary orbits, and then she starts talking and try to help understand what they mean. So she starts using a scientific approach. Location, similarity to the ring of Saturn's, lack of atmosphere, size, these are all things she took into consideration.
Yeah,
Quantity,
yeah,
groups.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. This is very helpful because one of the problems with the mythology approach, which is important to bring in, but it's driven heavily by narrative, and there's a lot of infiltration in narrative and a potential distraction. Whereas if you just look at the structure, and the ascending node, which I learned from Phil,
Yeah.
the ascending node, the discovery degree, and other points, you can start to map things out without needing the ego elements of narrative. But then when you add those, you get something fabulous also.
Yeah, it's one of the things that would make it very difficult for the average astronomer to accept astrology is to find out that you're looking at the myths for meaning. These actual bodies, it's a
Yeah.
it's a mental construct that they can't get their head around.
But they're always so good at naming them, with the exception of Uranus, which I agree with Rick should be called Prometheus.
Yeah, me
And they're
too.
all, and that's the first thing ever discovered by science. And I don't know who, it was originally called Herschel. I don't know who actually named that. Um,
Well,
but
uh,
Herschel,
uh, uh,
another brilliant man.
at first he wanted to name it
Sidus
George's Sidham
Georgius.
after
Yeah.
King George. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Which would have
and
been
you
better,
notice that,
really. I mean, but anyway.
yeah, because okay, so here you have Saturn, which makes sense, right? Here's this heavy guy. He rolls lead. He's got rings around him. He's the end of the known universe. As far as
Solstice.
they knew in those days, and so it makes a lot of sense. And then you come up with Uranus. Uranus is the sky. It was a more of a metaphorical concept than an actual entity. You
Hmm.
had Uranus and Gaia, and neither one was clearly defined enough like Saturn. So yeah, Rick Tarnas had a very good point. And a lot of times when I'm doing somebody's chart and I see Uranus uh, coming along, I talk to them about uh, Prometheus stealing the fire and giving it to mankind as far as the spark.
Yep.
But anyway, so I
Sure.
use the stories rather than, because you really can't get much stories from Uranus aside from the fact that he uh, had his
Balls chopped off, thrown in the sea, and it's Venus.
yes, which basically says that Venus is a very very old goddess, but we all knew that.
Well, and also, but that she's composed of the testicles of an even older god. I mean, that's really, we got to give that to the feminists to think about for a second.
Yeah, well, you know what the response will be.
No.
Yes, but that is the male version of the
Oh,
story.
yeah, the patriarchal version of the story, right?
Yes, because if you look at some of the stories, there are alternate versions. If you go back, there was one god. Yeah, one of the things I hate about my mind is sometimes I know something very vividly, but I can't find a piece of it. But it's not my age. I've always been this way. Anyway, there's this one god who was castrated and became a goddess. Um, uh, so it
Ah,
kind of, and the story goes that she was a god, and then the country that worshipped him as a god was invaded and taken over, and so they to make yeah,
they solved the problem. My by cutting his balls off and like, oh, now you're a goddess. But this has a little bit of Varuna to it. And I wish astrology were more into these early points. I put them into all. I don't know if you've ever seen my charts, which I basically build out with 50 planets. But I have gotten such mileage out of Varuna. Let me see if I can find one of my charts to show you. Such mileage out of working with Varuna, which is of the demotion myth, and then also with the contract myth, the gods who are the enforcers of contracts. Very
Okay, yeah.
important concept of Varuna, which your castrated transsexual forerunner reminds me of. Yeah, this is like a less populated chart. Like this is just kind of a quick job. Where I don't want to do it in solar fire. I want to add all the planets myself.
Why don't you want to do it in solar fire?
Because I want to hand construct the chart. I want to start with their framework, but I want to make everything I add, I want it to be my specific notation. And then I learned from Dave Rill. I don't know if you got along with Dave Rill, but he said,
"Oh, yes,
get all the trines and squares out of the middle. Any schmuck can see a square, but you cannot see a quindecile or a septile. So you use the interior of the wheel for the minor aspects, right? Because then I draw in the major aspects in colored pencil, and then if I mark the chart, I'm making a note that I registered that aspect exists." And then thanks to Marsden, whose book I discovered just this year, somebody pulled together his letters and his lectures and his articles. He's going off on the quindecile, and so I start to put it into charts. Well, no, I always had it in, but I didn't know what the fuck it was. And it is. I think it is by far the best aspect. The
talking about the
165.
The 165?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that I had a chapter in my book on that because of Al.
I've got to go find it. I've got Dave Rill's. I have an early one too somewhere. But no, Dave Rill republished Chiron Essence and Application for you.
Yes, he did, and a nice, gorgeous blue cover.
Yep. Yeah, he was special. He was the guy who really taught me astrology every night in the winter of 94 and 95, because he was in Ventura. He was really lonely. He had an 800 number. He didn't care about the phone bill on. I was already buying all my books and charts from him, and every night I would have a personal tutoring session. The entire winter I would call him up, and he would fill me in, and he gave me the address, he gave me the email and phone number of any astrologer I wanted. So I ended up calling them all up, and basically I enter astrology as a journalist, and I proceed as a journalist, and Rel was my source of calling all these people up on the phone those first couple of years. And finally one day he says to me, "You're ready. Hang out a shingle, charge $100 an hour. Congratulations."
Dave, it was Dave's idea to republish my book. He wants, because he had copies to sell that were the ones that originally they were ones that Al bound, and later on after Al died,
spring-bound ones, yes.
Yeah. So he offered to publish it for me, and I said sure. So we dialogued, and that was the result of that.
Yeah.
But after he died, his wife kind of consolidated the astrology center, and she still gets occasional orders for my book, and so I still get an occasional commission check from my book from his wife.
Oh, she's still selling books?
No, she's selling books that they've published.
So they're ebooks, or are they on demand, print on demand?
No. The blue copies. If somebody buys that book, orders that book from her, so it's a very small amount, but I still get them. So I don't know where they're seeing them, whether they see old ads or whatever, but so I still get a little residual from the Dave publication.
Yep. A couple of other things while we're here. What is your take on the Uranian points, the wit points?
All right. This is just between you and me because um I I don't use them. I also don't. I'm not saying they don't work. I have not found them to work for me. And I think it may be, if they work, it may be partly my attitude because I like things that you can prove exist.
Yep.
It's the same reason that I really don't use Vulcan, even though Alice Bailey thought so highly of it. And Solar Fire gives you two possible ways of putting Vulcan in, and there's other books about. I don't use Vulcan because I can't prove it. Everything that I use is either has been proved to be discovered or is a mathematical point that is.
No, Zane, I
that
think
you
this is a
calculate.
perfectly reasonable thing to say, and most people would agree with you. I think this is a very important thing to have in the discussion, that you want a tangible, solid object. Though remember that the part of fortune is not a solid object, the ascendant is not a solid object.
No, no, you did you hear? I don't. Doesn't have to be a solid object. If it's not a solid object, I have to have verifiable uh, calculations. So the ascendant is a point that you can calculate. It's
I
the
get it. I
actual
get you.
point.
Yep. I get it.
Yes.
I get it. And I'm going to dialogue with Gary Christensen about the origins of these things. And it's very foggy. When you go back to the beginning, the shit's in German, hasn't been put into English, or you can't find it in English. Now, Dave Rail put me onto them, and I started using them. And what I find is that they are very interesting. And what Dave Rail said is they'll always show up for the very big events. So when you are looking at a chart for something and like the Uranians all line up, you know you're hitting on something big. I have not seen that work out, but I still use them all. And I draw them in. You know what? I get to draw a lot of things, and I like drawing, so I draw them into my charts. And I mean, for example, this Mars retrograde began conjunct Vulcanus. With Mars, it's a 2 degree. It crossed Vulcanus, station retrograde, crosses back. There's a lot of energy in this Mars retrograde. And so
I
in my
know that.
horoscopes, I'm warning people this is an extra energized Mars retrograde. And when the thing turns inward, be careful. Don't gouge yourself up inside over things, because Mars is a sharp object, and now there's going to be heat and thrust added.
And how many times can you say that in a short period of time, Mars and Pluto are going to be opposition 3 times?
Yeah, I keep saying it. It's friggin' exciting. It's an initiation. And I went back and I looked for, I went back and I checked all of the, here it is. I wish Al Morrison were still alive. We'd have so much fun. I checked all of the oppositions of Mars retrograde to Pluto, and it only happens twice a century in our
That
epoch.
makes sense. That makes sense. I don't think we could survive more often than that.
Yeah, right. But this time it happens in these curious last degrees of Capricorn, first shot.
Yeah.
And then, so that was the send off for Pluto going into Aquarius, was an exact opposition to Mars. And then it goes right in, and then Mars changes signs. And now there's going to be 2 more. So this is integral. Plus we have all this Aries coming up. And I think this Mars retrograde story is like this kind of laboratory for what we're about to experience with this crazy freaking Aries all the way through 27. Saturn conjunct Neptune, Chiron conjunct Eris, Saturn conjunct Eris. all in this 2.5 year span with the world spinning off its axis.
Yeah. Do you know a astrologer, Jessica Adams?
No. Why would I
Okay.
know her?
Well, I just asked.
Did she
She and I
write
are
that
giving
Pluto has puppies?
well, I don't know that about that. She does a lot of stuff for general astrology. Like she talks a lot, gives a lot of information out about events happening to people's sun signs, but she's also very into what she calls well, she's got a series of goddesses that she studies in charts based on the several of the asteroids. But anyway, she and I are giving a talk in February on Saturn and Neptune leaving Pisces for Aries and the North Node leaving Aries for Pisces.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. And um, Kirsti Melto in Finland, one of the astrologers in my group, she's much better with computers than I am. And so I asked her to search for Saturn, Neptune on the Aries point. And we had to go back to 1 BC and we couldn't find anything. There have not even been very many Saturn Neptune conjunctions in Aries. I think we found four over 2,000 years. And the closest we got to Saturn Neptune on the Aries point was at around 27 Pisces back in medieval times when Neptune wasn't not known. So this is really quite special. I think that to say wild ride is an understatement.
Well, there's there are so many things. One of the concepts that Al used to tell me about it is he saw the truth as being this giant holographic thing. I forget what you call it, holographic crystal. You slice it anywhere, and you'll see the same thing in the piece, no matter where you slice it from,
Yeah.
right? That was his.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was thinking, okay, so one of the major bodies that changed signs this year is Sedna, moved into
Yes.
Gemini.
Huge. Totally
Yes,
parallel to Pluto and Aquarius.
and we
And now
we
Uranus
we
conjuncting it. Yep.
and we don't have any way of knowing what happened the last time it was in Gemini, because that was like 11,000 years ago.
Yeah, there were a lot of glaciers retreating.
In pairs,
Uranus and
probably.
Taurus, right where I'm sitting, was under 2 miles of ice, bro. 2 miles, that's a lot of ice. 10,000 feet of ice. So I take Sedna to be about environmental conditions, but in Gemini, we're talking about the environment of the mind under the influence of the all-consuming digital environment that is giving us
Yes.
this lovely conversation, but that has really screwed up a lot of things and driven people out of their minds. People are going crazy. They don't understand why.
Well, um, one of my friends is an astrologer who's really been uh, doing a lot of research in what he calls the dwarf planets. They're not necessarily all dwarfs, but Alan Clay. If you ever get the Mountain Astrology, he always has a full page ad in there for his dwarf planet university. But Alan Clay looks at Sedna going into Gemini as associated with the explosion in AI.
Yeah. Yeah, hold on. Well, so how about this? Uranus was last in Gemini, 1942 to 1949.
Yeah, my sister was born with that.
So that was computer science going from 0 to 1,000 in 7 years. And now we're about to have this again with Sedna in Gemini, trying by Pluto and Aquarius, another very AI type of placement. In 7 years, we are not going to recognize the computing world. We may not even need these boxes on the desk.
Well, I mean, when I was a kid, and I think I'm a little bit older than you. One of the things I used to read was the Sunday comics in the newspapers, and one of the comics was Dick Tracy, and Dick Tracy always had these little two-way uh, communication devices that were like iPhones on your wrist,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
okay, so a lot of the stuff that you might read about now in fantasy and science fiction in 5 or 10 years from now will be fact.
Well, it's happened 100 times. I mean, I think the one thing we're missing is the ability to like have your body transported by a kind of beam me up type of thing, which can't be good for you to take your body and turn it into molecules and put it back together on the other
You
side.
know, yeah, I mean, that was if I remember correctly, he came up with that idea out of necessity. He had to figure out a way to get the crew for the spaceship to a planet and vice versa. And he came up with that as a vehicle. It was not in his original idea for the story,
It
but
became such an important part of the story to solve that bridging problem.
yeah.
Which reminds me
So,
to take a good look at Roddenberry's chart. But
oh,
without I Love Lucy, no Star Trek.
yes, I know. I know that story. Well, when I was looking at Caraclow, one of the things I found is that every sci-fi writer that I could find a chart for had close Caraclow either to an angle or to a personal planet,
I
and
think the
which
one with the
gave me one
Caraclow
of my
QB1 conjunction. There was a Caraclow QB1 conjunction in the 60s. Yeah. And I've got it right at my
ah
midpoint of the moon and the sun or something like that. Here's the thing though. Like you and I can obviously juggle 30 planets in any chart. But I think for a lot of people, let's end here. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with all these planets. It drives them crazy. They end up with the who was Rick Levine's collaborator for many years. Uh,
yeah, he passed away, and I can't remember
yeah,
his name.
who erases all the asteroids from the blackboard and says, "Now we've got all this driveway shale out of the way. We can have a real conversation about astrology." And I've immortalized that into referring to the asteroids as driveway shale. Um, yeah, sure, they're not going to be, are going to be offended. Um, and I have my tricks. I have my tricks for using them, but I'm curious what you would say to an astrologer who's grown up on, the jury's still out on Chiron school of thought. Like, there's still some people
Okay,
who are like, well, the jury's still out on Chiron. I
all
hope
right.
someone's bringing
So
food to the jury.
I do have a spiel because I've this has come up. I said, well, when I got started in astrology at the tail end of the 60s, that there were still astrologers in those days that did not use Pluto.
It wasn't in Raphael's ephemeris till the 70s.
And do you use Pluto? Yes. Would you take it out of your charts? No. Okay. So the difference between those people and you is that they were not willing to look at it. You, on the other hand, look at it and see that it has value. You don't have to use Chiron, but you can't dismiss it without looking at it. You look at it, I think you'll find that you're going to want to start putting it in charts.
Right. Yeah. And it's similar with the other ones, but I mean, I have somewhat relentless curiosity, and I'm probably doing astrology 12 hours a day. So I have bandwidth to handle things, but I see things that other astrologers are not even looking at, like the cluster going on in early Capricorn right now, which is Ixion, Pholus, Quatwar, and Cupido, one of the crazy planets without a friggin' body. But they are all talking about this family theme. They're all grouped together and hanging around, and I think they're churning up a lot of family karma. Ceres came through retrograde over the summer. So I was talking about the grape and the grain. You know, we've got the grain coming out of Ceres and the grape coming out of
Yeah.
Pholus. And like, let's think about this 123 billion gallons of alcohol consumed every year on the planet.
You know, there's a lot of very powerful stories about Ceres, and probably, you know, when I mention Ceres, probably the only one that people think about is Ceres, Persephone, and Pluto. You know, that's the one people know, right?
Yeah. But there's so much more
Yeah,
to Ceres than that. I mean,
yeah. Ceres and her sister. So we have the Greek and Roman as Demeter. They're the Eleusinian mysteries. You
mhm.
know, um, there's some stories that say that Persephone was born to Ceres when she was raped by her brother Neptune. So I mean,
Neptune,
there's
would
this.
he would do Neptune would do that thing like that?
I don't know. I mean, this is a very incestuous family. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
so the I love Ceres. I have Ceres at 15 Pisces, and my ascendant is 15 Pisces, right?
So you line up with
So
my Mars Chiron conjunction in Pisces. And your Uranus is right bang on my ascendant north node. So I'm surprised it's taken us this long to have this conversation. But I knew to have it. I knew to have it. We've got to get these conversations in where people can find them, because now I think the biggest problem with astrology is it's become illiterate. You have whole generation of astrologers who don't have books, who can't use an ephemeris. And we are
that's one of the
bookish. We are
topics.
bookish people.
That's one of the topics that Lynette and I talk about a lot. Is that when she and I assume you started astrology, you had an ephemeris, a table of houses, and you had to maybe a logarithm table or a slide rule to do your calculations.
I got in when Dave Rail cast all my original charts, but I knew many astrologers who had to calculate their own charts, and I absolutely know how to use the ephemeris, and I
So
understand declination and all this stuff. So no, I never cast a
one of
chart
the
myself, but
one of the things that you get when you cast a chart yourself that you don't get when you do it with a computer, as you're putting the planets into the wheel, you're beginning to interpret the chart in your mind
yeah,
as you plug them in.
yeah, but it's an
Whereas
I
when
Ching
you,
meditation. It's a meditation.
yeah, yeah. So I do believe that no astrologer should get any kind of certification if he doesn't know how to do a chart. He doesn't have to do it afterwards, but he needs to know how to do it because he needs to understand what it's like to build the chart in your mind, to put the pieces together rather than just looking at the assembled package.
Well, that's why I put the minor planets in myself. And the way that I do it is I go onto Tracy Delaney's website, which I'm sure you've seen, sirenu.com.
Yeah.
And then I call up the date and time and I go to a 90-degree sort. And I pick anything that looks interesting in the base chart, which is what I call it. Let's say there's some conjunction or something on the ascendant, and I build out the whole aspect pattern of the minor planets around that and manually construct the aspect pattern and then design it into the chart. So I've come up with a kind of a evolution on casting the chart, which is that the chart that I ultimately use is a unique thing of my own creation, a unique little piece of art that's symbolic of that place and time. And then I publish that so people can have it to print or play with or just hang it on the wall or do whatever they they want with it. And so that's how I narrow down my selection of what goes into the chart. Is I'm looking at that 90 degree sort, and then I can go by theme also. So while the client may say, well, I like to take a lot of pictures, I'll immediately go to Photographica and let the client's own speech tell me what themes might want to be added. I'll draw that into the chart. Very nice. And I've just seen these things work so beautifully so many times that I couldn't imagine. Well, I'll tell you where I imagine. One last thing. When I've got a serious horary chart, like 9/11, a serious mundane chart, I will
Yeah.
take out all of the driveway shale and go out only to Saturn. And my theory is if I can't see the event in the Ptolemaic planets, something's off. So I
Well,
work with
yeah,
different.
yeah. One of the things that I have taught when I am teaching people about adding Chiron charts is first thing you do is just do the chart with the Ptolemaic planets. Understand that. Then add Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Yeah.
Understand that. Then you can add Chiron. You can't understand Chiron if you don't understand from the planets, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
Yeah. Did you know David Arner?
No.
Well, he was a Rob Hand student and Project Hindsight early adapter. He lived right in my neighborhood. And he taught me to do exactly that. He knew that I was going to be doing the minor planets. And we did an astrology lesson where he showed me my chart with just out to Saturn, then the modern planets added, then Chiron and the asteroids added. And he basically said, they're going to pretty much tell you the same thing in different ways, but you want to have that chart with the 7 visible planets and really understand what's going on there. And so when I'm doing like a case that I think is a judge and jury type of case, like 9/11, I will learn how to make my point with the and of course with the 9/11 chart, you can't miss that mutual reception between Libra and between Saturn and Mercury. To trine practically to the minute. There it is. You don't need anything else. Void of course moon. Void of course moon. And a mutual reception between Saturn and Mercury. Oh, there you go. So good. Well, this reiterates my point of the modern astrologers need to respect the classical tradition. I'm sure Chiron would agree with us on this point.
Oh, well, yeah.
If we had to ask him.
No doubt. One thing that's always stuck in my mind, I remember reading one of the Greek authors that said that Chiron would not allow his students to leave training until they learned one basic point, and that was to honor Zeus above all, or to honor Jupiter above all. If they hadn't learned that, they couldn't go out into the world.
So what's the metaphor there? I mean, Mike Brown says Jupiter's the big boss of the solar system. Jupiter controls all the other orbits in the solar system. But what was Chiron's point?
Well, Jupiter to Chiron was the fount of how can I put it? If you did not honor the king of the gods, if you did not honor the head honcho, then it was like the way the Christians say that the house that is built without God will not remain standing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing. So Jupiter's place was at the top. He oversaw everything. You had to give him. I always think of it in the context of Jupiter. as being this what's behind the higher mind. I have Mercury as my lower mind, so I'm talking to you, but where do I get the meanings for the words I talk to you?
Mm-hmm.
I see that as Jupiter. The understanding the meanings, the understanding the meaning in philosophy and religion. And so I see Chiron saying you got to understand what things mean. You got to understand the symbols. You got to understand uh, the deeper truths before you can use anything else I've taught you.
Yep. So while we're there, or an organizing principle, a philosophical organizing principle, the understanding of a kind of a bottom line. Dave Rell said the early Chiron pioneers recognized Chiron as a stand-in for the Christ in the chart, a
Well,
spiritual principle in the chart. Is that true?
I don't know whether it's recognized or whether I have seen some people suggest parallels. For example, Christ died because of the sins to free mankind because of they sinned. Chiron left this earthly coil to free Prometheus, who was punished because he had sinned against the gods. Chiron was wounded in his heel. Jesus was wounded in his heel when he was on the cross. A lot of kind of parallels. That's what I saw, but I never saw it as a stand-in. I saw it as people saying, "Look at these parallels, and what do you get out of it?"
Right. Right. Okay. Any other thoughts you want to add? We're
Um,
speaking to posterity here.
well, I think it's very, very important to look at the root of Chiron's name. It
Mm.
has to do with using the hands to teach, and I think that's very, very, very important. I mean, all the words in Greek that we now use in English, you have uh, chiropractic, using the hands to manipulate the spine to heal. The old word for podiatry was chiropody, using the hands to
French
manipulate the feet.
chirurgy is still surgery.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have this great book about a surgeon. He was a French surgeon, uh, and he worked in a place where a lot of women were being locked up for what was called oh, all these women hysteria. And he became a pioneer in medical practice in uh, making scientific observations about diseases. So much that some of his methods are still taught in medical schools.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing his chart, and he had a very strong Chiron in his chart.
Yep.
Um,
I, I've never really gotten anyone to jump up and down about this as excitedly as I do. But you know when the first pre-discovery photo of Chiron was, right?
yeah,
1895.
which was also one of Chiron's perihelions.
And do you know that that Palmer discovered chiropractic the same year?
Uh, no, I don't just
I
know
mean,
that.
how about that? I mean,
I wrote an article in the Key, my newsletter. I talked about Palmer and about Röntgen,
who is Röntgen?
the guy who discovered X-rays.
Ah,
And they both discovered, they were both born around Chiron's perihelion, and they made their discovery, chiropractic and X-rays, when Chiron returned to a perihelion.
Right.
And if you've ever been to a chiropractor, you know that they will not do your chart unless they've seen your X-rays first, if they're decent. It's a major tool to a chiropractor, the X-rays.
I have been lucky to have escaped that. But I guess with digital
Chiropractic
X-rays,
saved
I
my,
wouldn't be so concerned because they're much lower power.
well, chiropractic saved my sanity. I was working in a factory and I was pulling a hand truck, and it was wedged between two boxes, and I pulled, and rather than the hand truck going, my feet went out from under me, and I landed on my back
Aye,
on a concrete floor.
aye.
I was aside from the painkillers, I was seeing a chiropractor for 6 months, and I was very lucky in that the chiropractor I was seeing agreed to do the chiropractic work for me in exchange for charts for her, her husband, her family members.
Yeah.
So I have a very a fond memory of chiropractic. It basically, if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I would have been able to deal with the pain. You know.
Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, and it used to be called Asclepian manipulation, and it was the first hands-on healing. I mean, it goes back into ancient days. This is not any kind of a new thing.
No, but the idea that the hands-on healing is not new. But what Palmer discovered was the specific realignment of the
Vertebrae.
spine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And being able to, what's interesting is that his discovery of chiropractic and Röntgen's discovery of X-rays were both accidents. So
Well, I know the
he was,
story of the deaf janitor.
yeah, right. Well, Röntgen's was working with these rays, and he accidentally took a picture of his wife's hand and saw the bones. It was total accident.
Yeah. Right. Good. Well, Zane, thank you very much.
I hope whatever questions you have been answered.
No, we've created quite an atmosphere here. I think people are going to like to see this because I think this is what a real astrological discussion sounds like. It's not overly technical. There's a lot of philosophy involved in love of life and the questing adventure of discovery, which is what astrology is. I have a very restless mind. I have never once been bored by astrology. I haven't stopped doing it since 1994. 7 days a week for 30 years. It's never once bored me.
Well, do you know that I actually left astrology for a few years?
Was that during? Did you have a kind of a Christian revival moment?
Well, yeah, but okay, so
That
here I was dating a girl after my wife divorced me. I was dating a girl, and her brother was a Pentecostal Christian,
uh-oh.
and and her brother talked her into going, and so she talked me into going, and
uh,
eventually I reached a point where I said, I came to this decision. I'm not saying that astrology is evil, but I cannot say it's not. And I cannot in good conscience continue to use it because I don't know. That was my logic.
and how did you get
And
back
so
in? How did you get back in?
Well, just like I got out because of a girl, it was another girl. So I was, I, what can I say? I have Venus conjunct Pluto, but
So did Al, by
I
the way.
was
Hold on.
what?
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I was a working as a classified advertising salesman for a newspaper in Pennsylvania, and there was a new hire, and I had seniority, so I was the kind of person that could talk to anybody. So uh, I was told to take her under my wing and show her the ropes. And so one day I had one of my colleagues come up to me and ask me, why didn't I like Sandy? And I said, I don't dislike her. She says, well, she thinks you hate her, the way you talk to her when you're trying to teach her. Well, apparently I was being this uh, very terrible teacher, like, showing something once and expecting the person to know it, and that was it, and being irritated when they didn't, that kind of teacher. Um, when I realized that, I changed my attitude toward her, and I started teaching her, and we got connected, and a relationship grew out of that, and we became lovers, and eventually she and I moved in together. After we started seeing each other, she uh she knew about my past. She said, I would really love for you to get back into astrology. I would love to know about my chart. And she basically uh convinced me to
Personally
get back
seduced
into
you
it.
into.
Yeah. And my sister wrote her a letter uh several months later, which said, I want to thank you so much for giving my brother back to me. He was a stranger and he met you and now he's himself again. Apparently, when I gave up astrology, I became flat,
Flat?
two dimensional, two dimensional.
Ah, well, and you're not.
Yeah, but when everything was black and white, when you're into Christianity to that kind of depth, and everything was black and white, then you are two dimensional.
Yeah.
You are flat.
Well, it's not really very Christianity. I mean,
No, and what I'll tell you, one year, I was asked by a local synagogue. They were having a rabbi who was talking about the astrology from a biblical perspective, and they wanted to know if I would join him in a joint discussion. So the two of us talked about astrology, and he talked about the ancient Jews' attitude, and they saw astrology as being from God, but there was also a bad use of astrology. Astrology from God is anything that helps you want to do God's will. Anything that you use astrology for that is totally for yourself is not from God. That's the Jews,
sure.
and that's the only evil astrology.
Yeah. I mean, look, right in
And
the Bible,
remember that, yeah, the Bible doesn't. It's not against astrology, and Jesus certainly knew everything that all the other teachers know. So he knew astrology wasn't bad.
well, he says in Revelation, he says, "Look for the signs of my return in the sun, the moon, and the stars." It is a
Not only that, you
direct
go back to
instruction.
you go back in the beginning, in the beginning, when the he created the lights, he created the sun and moon and stars for signs and for seasons. Now, if he created them for signs, who's going to read the signs?
Yep. Takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, it's about 11:30 here, and I
Oh
think I'm
dear.
getting tired. So,
All right, Zane, thank you so very much. This has been
all right.
fabulous.
All right.
All right, I will.
Catch you again sometime.
I'm going to hit you up for your email, for your physical address to send you your very own Chiron coin.
All right. You want it now?
No, off the record. We'll do it by email, and
Okay.
I'll catch you further on down Life's Highway.
All right.
Yeah.